Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Martin at the National Association of System Heads. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar on the system response to COVID-19. I know that I don't have to tell any of you how important your system is in marshaling the resources of your campuses and your students and faculty in your states in order to help us all address the current crisis. We know from talking to people from across NASH over the past several weeks that there is a lot of great activity going on. There also are a lot of great questions, and our network is really very much in evidence as people have been sharing their thoughts and challenges and resources across the systems. So we thought that it was time to try to bring this conversation to a wider audience beyond just the network of student success leaders that have been part of TS3 for the past 5 years. And so here we are today. So I'm really glad that you were able to take the time to join us. If you could go, Chrissy, to the next slide. I would like to recognize our partnership with the Systems Center at the University of Albany. This work would not be possible without their support. And if you take a look at the folks here on this slide, you will recognize people that have been part of the work at NASH for a long time. Nancy Zimpher, of course, was our board chair for a number of years. She was the founding director of the Systems Center at the University of Albany as one of the many initiatives she's undertaken as part of her retirement activities as the SUNY Chancellor Emerita. Jason Lane, the director of the Systems Center, Maria Kahn, the assistant director, and David Epstein, the academic coordinator, have all been involved in various activities with NASH, and they've stepped up to provide very significant support to us as we work to support our systems throughout NASH in dealing with this crisis. Unfortunately, Nancy will not be able to join us today. But what I'd like to do at this point is turn this over to Jason Lane, and he will share with you the results of some work that we've been doing together over the past couple of weeks.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, and welcome to everybody. We're delighted to be able to be with you today. Some of you know we sent out a survey asking you all to respond on a variety of indicators about what you're dealing with right now in your systems. My thanks to those of you who responded. We received responses from 22 systems, and I'm going to walk us through quickly the data that we gathered as a pretext for the conversation we're going to have in a few minutes. What I will say, I don't think there's anything here that is largely surprising, but probably confirmatory that we're all dealing with much the same thing right now in the level of urgency. Here we look at student supports, and just to sort of give you an indicator of how this works, the red is extremely urgent, the yellow is somewhat urgent. So we'll be mostly focusing on those two colors. But what you can see here is that, issues of accommodation, issues of food security, issues of emergency aid to students, all thinking about those things about what can support our students right now in this time of crisis has been on top of mind for folks. There are other issues like loan repayments and refund policies that are pressing and will become more pressing, I think, as the time moves forward. When we think about faculty supports, we don't see the large level of urgency in quite the same way we do in other areas, although these are no less important. And certainly where we see some action right now, some thoughts around how the travel ban may be affecting research, and we know research in general is being dealt with in a variety of ways, and how we rethink that in this current environment. Concerns around tenure and promotion, and how do we count this semester and the things that are happening this semester, or don't count it. And I think as we move forward, faculty searches will be something more influenced by the financial situation that we are grappling with. Not surprisingly, as we have moved remote, all of us now working remotely from home and teaching remotely, the online capacity and support has been top of mind. This slide is the one where you see the most red and yellow. Obviously thinking through not just how do we move online, but what are the support services students need to be successful. Advising, other sort of supports that they might be needing, the library, the wraparound services for those who are struggling. All of those are critically important, but also the support service for faculty as we help them move rapidly into a remote environment is becoming obviously is very important for our campuses and systems to be thinking about. Academic calendar, I mean, this is one where we don't see as much of an issue. Fall semester, I think spring semester for the most part, folks are continuing largely with the semester as it is, except in a remote environment. What we are hearing from folks and hearing the survey that summer, people are thinking a lot more about what do we do with summer, and we're seeing more and more systems and campuses moving to fully online instruction for summer or just canceling summer sessions. And I think as we are moving forward now, people are beginning to think about the fall. We certainly hope that we don't have to adjust for the fall, but there is the outside possibility, depending on which health professional we listen to, that there may be a resurgence and we'll have to rethink what the fall looks like in terms of our offerings. So I think it's out there on the horizon, just beginning to be thought about. Tied to resources, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we think about enrollment projections, where people are really, I think the most concerned, and not surprisingly, who is going to show up in the fall. Whether that is the new incoming freshmen, because for so many of us, the timing of this couldn't be worse in terms of disrupting traditional activities around yield, but also who's coming back in the fall, and what does it mean in terms of the support services that we need to be thinking about to help students be successful. Not just this semester, but bringing them back in the fall. In the area of sort of governance, I think covers a wide range of issues, but again, business continuity is the most pressing, and I think for all of us, that makes the most sense. How do we keep the enterprise moving forward in this new environment that we're in? Communication, critically important. How are we making sure that folks are aware of the situation, that they are up to date with issues that they need to be grappling with? We all know that the situation is evolving quickly, and so in some ways, what we say yesterday is out of date by today, and so this issue of communication becomes important, but also the issue of managing the crisis. How do we do that in this environment? How do we make sure that we're leading effectively? I think top of mind for a lot of leaders in this space at the system and campus level. Human resources, I think a lot of this has been forced upon us in terms of having to respond to state mandates, system mandates, gubernatorial mandates. But for the most part, and you can see from our speakers here today, largely the workforce is at home and working from home. What does that mean in terms of remote environment? How do we navigate that space? How long will we be in this space? How do we take all those functions we used to do just by running into each other and translating them to a remote environment? But then also defining who is an essential employee. That takes on a whole different onus when you're out of action for a month or so. When you're a snow day, it's one thing for those of us in the Northeast who has to show up on campus. But when you're not there for a month or more, who is essential brings on new meaning in terms of how we define them. Obviously, the emergency planning piece came back as extremely urgent. I think where you see here that emergency transition to remote online instruction, I think was top of mind for most folks. Again, the relevancy of that right now is just that's what we're focusing on, figuring out the social physical distancing. In some ways, that's been surpassed by the mandates for those of us and others in states where it's been forced upon us to stay home. But for those of us who have students on campus, we also have to be thinking about those issues as well. The commencement and cancellation piece, and I think every day we see more and more campuses moving to either a cancellation or a postponement of commencement in some form or fashion, and then obviously thinking about how do we keep people informed of the changes that are occurring through an alert system. This is going to be more pressing. I think we're finally getting a little space to breathe, so people beginning to think about the impact of the financial situation. These are so tied together, but I think, people are really thinking about tuition revenue, and that goes back to the concern about who shows up in the fall or who doesn't show up in the fall. And all of our states now are grappling with the fallout of the coronavirus, and there inevitably will likely be some sort of cut in funding, perhaps not everywhere, but I'm already seeing states have posted cuts in higher ed. Missouri had a headline this morning about that. And then it sort of trickles down there, sort of thinking about athletics and then annual giving and research revenue and so forth. I think the technology costs are one that are relevant simply because we moved to a remote environment, and we got to figure out how to fund all these things that we're doing very, very rapidly, both in terms of supporting our faculty moving this direction, new licenses, new software, but also all the hardware that might be needed by by students and faculty as they move home and try to do this work from afar. We asked about, connecting with external communities. Again, not surprising, governor's office and elected officials being sort of top of mind for folks. Clearly, we know the governor's offices are very important right now. They're the ones that are setting the agenda in terms of where states are going and how states are responding to the crisis. And, we are then responding to a lot of those executive orders and other mandates. Also connections with healthcare, talking with colleagues across the country, dealing with the state level healthcare and the county level healthcare has been very important in terms of monitoring the progression of the virus and the responses to the virus. Still major urgency, but less so in the area of K-12 and social services. I think we'll see more focus on K-12 moving forward, particularly as we see how this sort of remote learning impacts students and what that means for preparedness moving into higher education next year and the year beyond. So those are sort of the high level overview of what we found, and we will share the PowerPoint with you so you can look at that data in more depth if you would like. I would say that it's a snapshot in time for all of us. Urgency changes every single day, if not hour by hour. Part of what we're also doing is setting up the NASH Crisis Clearinghouse. And this is an opportunity to share information with each other. For some, we have been a meeting every couple of weeks with system leaders to talk about what's happening on systems. We are sharing best practices, raising questions, responding to each other in terms of issues that they are dealing with. And so the clearinghouse is going to be a way that we're going to try to make more public some of this information that we're learning, including documents or policies. We're going to be we've asked system leaders to begin blogging about their experiences as well so that we can share those with each other. And a lot of this is just about assessing, reflecting, and lessening the variation so that we can learn from each other so that we're all not recreating the wheel at the same time. And so if you have information that you'd like to contribute to that, things that you're doing, new policies you've implemented, communications you've sent out, please send those to Maria Kahn or the System Center here. If you have questions about it, feel free to send those as well. We don't have it here, but we do have a listserv that's been set up, which we will share with you as well, where people can post questions, systems can post questions about issues they're dealing with and exchange information with each other. So with that, Rebecca, I'll turn it back to you to introduce our panel to provide the context here.
Sorry, I was muted. So today we have going to hear from four leaders in four systems about the challenges that they're facing, and in very short order we'll open this up so it will be really a conversation with all of you and give you the opportunity as well to ask questions and respond to some of these ideas. If as you are listening to any of these people you have a question or a concern you want to share, please use the chat function. To do that, we'll keep an eye on that and try to bring you into the conversation at the appropriate time. So let me start by asking Jo Bachman from the University System of Maryland to share her thoughts on, what's your greatest concern at the moment? We know this is changing day by day, but what's it look like to you today? And I don't see Jo. I thought we had her, but maybe we've lost her. So let me move to Brock Tessman in Montana. I know I can see your face, Brock, so I know you're on the line.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everybody. So my role at the Montana University System, our deputy commissioner here. So my area is really academic affairs, student affairs, research. And so I'll probably slant a little bit in that direction, but hopefully I can speak on behalf of our commissioner, Clay Christian, and my deputy commissioner colleagues as well. We have 16 campuses in Montana, about 45,000 students. And I say that just to let you know that we have a fairly dispersed system, lots of different types of campuses, 2-year, 4-year, regional comprehensive, R1, research doctoral. And I'd like to think, and I believe we have a strong governing board and a fairly centralized system office here. Obviously, we have our fiscal situation and our fiscal challenge as probably the primary concern. I doubt anyone on this call would break from that. But I thought I might focus a little bit on our concerns as they might be organized under the concept of equity. And I think this actually touches on a lot of different areas. But I mean, first and foremost, we think about the current situation we have on our campuses, most of whom have moved to remote delivery. But as you know, for many students, campus is home. It is the place that they have, to live and learn. And one of our chief challenges has been making sure that we're adequately supporting and serving those students that remain on our campus, that it doesn't become some kind of two-tiered system where we have students stranded on our campuses simply because they have a lack of resources or lack of other options. Now, practically, we are operating a essential services model, which means we're going pretty bare bones in terms of what we have to offer those students. But our challenge, and I think we've met it, has been really making sure that they are served well residentially in terms of meal service and some of the other essential services. It's an ongoing concern. I think it'll be something, of course, we deal with through the rest of the spring. As we move to remote delivery, I mean, equity is huge here in so many different ways. Just broadly, if you think about the course offerings, disciplines across the Montana University system, some are more amenable to remote delivery than others. And so we have equity concerns when it comes to students in, say, the social sciences or humanities learning remotely compared to students who may be in the trades and who may need welding facilities or hands-on clinical experiences in order to complete their education. We've done our best to try to use technology, simulations, and other strategies to address that equity gap. I have, I guess, multiple times a week a call with our chief academic officers and our two-year leaders, and I say, how is remote delivery going? They say, we've talked to our faculty and all the students have pretty positive responses. They're all adjusting, faculty are adjusting and stepping up. But then the big question comes, well, what about the dogs that don't bark, so to speak? What about the students you're not hearing from at all because they're not at all engaged? When you have a physical classroom setting, you can detect that a little bit more easily than you can online. And so we're worried about retention and re-engagement in this area or this era of remote delivery. And certainly there's an equity element there too. Students who don't have access to technology, who are not as proficient with technology, who are at home with a single parent perhaps, or a parent who needs that computer in order to complete their own work in order to earn money for the household. It's a challenging situation. And then of course there are the equity issues with respect to disability and accessibility in our haste, which was warranted to move to remote delivery. Of course, we struggle to make sure that all the content and instruction that's being moved to remote is accessible for our special populations. And I'll wrap up just by one last point, Rebecca, and that is that moving forward, obviously we have an equity concern in terms of our mission for college access. We're an open access state from our 2 years to our 4 years, and we worry very much about what was 40% of our population that doesn't pursue any post-secondary education at all. And I think our commissioner, myself, others worry quite a bit about what happens to that group now that may have an even more clouded future economically and academically. So thanks, Rebecca, if I went in a little bit long.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, I think I'm going to go to Rob Kramer in Wisconsin. Rob, I'm going to unmute you. I know that you, Rob, you come at this from a different side of the house, so to speak, on the business and finance side. So what's your greatest concern today?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. In Wisconsin, I serve as the Vice President for Administration, so I do have a different lens on it. I think Brock did a great job covering the equity and access issues. You know, one of the things that I have been struck by throughout this is just the complexity of this and the scale of it and the number of moving parts. I think many of us have experience with a natural disaster that impacts maybe one institution or a community or two, just the sheer scale of this, and trying to help our institutions, the 13 universities with 26 campuses around Wisconsin, all engage in a coordinated effort with our state emergency operations center, with their county or municipal emergency activities and public health officials, and then getting information up to our elected officials, both the governor's office that Jason mentioned, and then also federal officials. Keeping all those balls in the air and not letting anything drop too quickly or too frequently is, I think, a really big piece of the challenge for those of us who are in systems, because we're trying to think across all those different constituencies and entities. The other piece of the puzzle I worry about is this gets longer and longer, the burnout of people at the institutions. Many of our campuses were already fairly leanly staffed to begin with. And again, if you have a fire in a building, that kind of creates a lot of churn for a short period of time. I think this is going to go on for a while in terms of just the intensity, both for our students and our faculty, but also for the different program leaders at the institutions, thinking about both now the immediacy of the semester, so an academic dean or a res hall person trying to understand what I need to do to get through the semester. Then what does the summer look like, and what does the fall look like? And some of these planning cycles are overlapping, because that summer and fall is coming very quickly, and people are thinking about those. And just the capacity of us to keep up with all this is a concern. And I think Jason's slides about just kind of the mental health and professional support for people. So one of the things I've been trying to do, and President Cross has been, I think, really modeling this well, is encouraging the chancellors and other leaders at the different institutions to think about taking care of themselves and their teams, and to encourage people to disconnect a little bit here and there and find some time to recharge, because that's going to be very important as we go forward. And I think it's a big risk for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're right about that for sure. John Hayek, what's it look like to you from Texas?
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. For those folks that don't know, I'm the Vice Chancellor for Academic and Health Affairs with the Texas State University System. Our Chancellor, Brian McCall, gives his best to all. Just a quick sense in terms of our system as a whole. We're the oldest system in Texas. We are the third largest, enrolling about 86,000 students, about 40% Pell, over half minority students. We have 4 universities and 3 two-year institutions in our system, about 15 to 16,000 employees. Quick story, folks that can see my background here, my virtual background. I took this picture actually about a month ago in central Spain, which is a little bit scary right now to think about, given that the country's had over 100,000 cases of COVID-19 and 10,000 deaths, but we're healthy here. But certainly wanted to extend, our thoughts and prayers to all the families and healthcare and emergency providers in New York City, across the country, and across the world. It's really a difficult time. In terms of the greatest concern, just to really echo, I think, a little bit in terms of what's already been said. I really think the physical, mental, and emotional health of our faculty, staff, and students is probably the thing I'm most concerned about. This is with most people, this is a time of amazing stress and anxiety, which is adding on top of an already what we're seeing skyrocketing rates of student anxiety and depression across our campuses. I mean, just the stress of college related to a successful life, the stress of grades, the impact on their future, the stress of paying for college, the stress of food security, housing security, and just this added on top of everything can be obviously a little much. One of our division heads in our system put it this way: they really felt that in some ways, the easiest part of all this was putting the classes online. But the hardest part is how to encourage and promote faculty and students related to their own motivation in dealing with really these unprecedented levels of, sickness, death of loved ones, limited access to technology, job losses, overworked, troubling access basic needs, the toilet paper phenomenon, and dealing with children or parents at home who are home from school due to closures or other facilities. So just the mental and physical and emotional stress, and finding ways to stay energized is certainly a big concern. The other thing that's, that we realize, and I think intuitively, most of us know this, is that for many students, the routine of actually being on campus or going to class is one place in their lives where there's some form of stability, not having to deal with other stressors of life. And now that, now this environment is even being upset by that. I think we're also concerned right now about students that are just simply gone off the grid. As we've started to ramp up our online courses, there are students that are just not showing up, not participating, and we don't know if it's they're health related, uncertain whether they're technology related. I mean, we're doing everything that we can to continue their studies, to get them to continue their studies, and by giving them extra access to MiFis or Chromebooks or laptops where we have them available, but obviously very worried that they're not just simply going to disappear and not come back, which is related obviously to another concern that's already been mentioned in terms of the impact on enrollment, retention, recruitment for the summer and fall. We're already seeing numbers that are down for the summer due to the crisis. Recruitment activities across our system are down already by 20 to 25% in some cases, which is obviously giving a lot of our CAOs and CFOs a lot of concern related to the impact on budget, the ability to retain quality faculty and staff, implications on state budgets, etc. I think in the end, I get partially from a personal perspective, and I shared this earlier on an earlier call with folks this week. I guess I'm concerned a little bit about the general public and legislative leadership at the state and federal level not fully understanding or appreciating what our faculty and staff are doing to help our students succeed and ultimately contribute to this high-skilled workforce that we need. Just an example of this, in the past week, I was asked to respond to an external stakeholder that was interested in hearing about anything quote unquote innovative or creative that our institutions are doing related to COVID-19. I think it was really, to give the person credit, I think it was a little bit more intended on the research perspective, trying to find some helpful stories to, that are a good narrative for higher education. But I think, in my mind, it made me think a little bit about just a possible disconnect that some folks may have in terms of the difficulty of responding in the way we have over the last several weeks. In our system alone, our faculty have converted over 5,000 face-to-face courses or 12,000 sections to remote or online learning, which is really, in a 2-week period of time, that's a pretty amazing feat in and of it by itself, with really no or minimal extra resources. And obviously those numbers are multiplied by thousands across the country. So, I'll end, obviously a few concerns, but I'd also kind of be remiss if I didn't really extend a huge congratulations actually to our faculty, staff, and students really across our system in the country. It was really just some amazing work to keep the academic enterprise moving forward during this crisis. But I also think that this reinforces that we are learning organizations at the core, with the ability to deal with complex problems quickly. And I sense this is the type of leadership that's going to be really required for us to continue to be successful in the next year and the years to come. Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to connect Joe Boffman, and I'm not sure
She is here.
she's here. There
I-
she is. Oh, there you are. Good. Okay,
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can.
You can? All right, I can't hear you, but I
We can hear you.
undid the I ended the phone. Let me, if you can hear me, let me turn the corner just a moment and answer the second question first. On what have we learned?
Okay, wait, Joe. We're still on what's your biggest concern? We haven't
Okay.
gone to those questions. It's like, what's at the top of you? What's you're most concerned about now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay, can I go ahead and talk now?
yes, go ahead.
Okay, I can't hear you, but I'm reading your lips, Rebecca.
Okay,
Let me turn the corner just a moment and talk for a minute in context about the fact that I believe good leadership counts. And I think what we're hearing each other say in trying to protect ourselves and all of those around us is focus on the things that you in fact can control and do better or for other people that they can't do for themselves. And I would talk about that in the idea of our biggest concern at the system level. We're allowing the campuses to deal directly with the students. Our concerns have to do with getting barriers out of the way for our campuses and coordinating things among campuses so people don't have to do things twice. So we're doing a lot of coordinating with our community colleges. I'm on the phone every day with our Secretary of Higher Education at least once or twice. And we're working with our state certification boards. And we've got to do some of these things from the system level to allow our campuses to do those things that they need to do. While we can all be very concerned about all of our students, we're at the leadership level, we're trying to focus on the things that we can do that will make a big difference to our folks. I share all the concerns that our folks have had. We have digital divides. We have individuals that we're still trying to get computers and online technology to. But I would urge each of us to think very carefully about what we can focus on and which levers we can push to make things better. And then when we come back around with the second question, I'll talk a little bit more about the idea that leadership also leads. Right now, I'll leave you though with the fact that from the top, compassion, understanding, and caring really makes a difference. And I think will reinforce all of the hard work that our people are doing on the campuses. I'll turn it back to you, Rebecca, now.
okay. So Chrissy, why don't you put up the slide with the two questions that we wanted to, that Joe has started in on, but we wanted to ask our panel to address, and invite members of the larger audience to also share their thoughts. And so those two questions are, we'll start with the first one. What's your highest need relative to your capacity to meet that need? What do you need now that you don't have, in other words? And so you can see those here on the screen, and I will just let, I'm going to unmute the whole panel now and let you chime in. So any of you want to start, please go ahead.
This is Brock Tessman from Montana. Rebecca, I would say this is a need that might be 4 weeks away right now, but I'll tell you, we have a hiring freeze in the state. It's quite possible we may need to let some of our faculty and staff go in the relative near future. And we know across our tutor system in particular, that we're about to get a flood of Montanans coming from professional careers who find themselves laid off and who need upskilling workforce training. We know we'll have a flood of high school graduates that maybe last year would have left directly for a high paying job that are going to now look for some secondary education. So we are asking our 2-year system in particular to ramp up programming, update that programming to reflect today's economic needs precisely at the time that they're under the greatest level of stress mentally in terms of their bandwidth, and actually precisely at the time that we are in many cases asking them to let go of some of their human resources. And so that widening gap is something that's really on my radar. I wouldn't put it at the same level as our public health needs right now, but it's coming fast.
Okay, great. Rob, what about you in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think I would echo Brock's comments. A big part of the challenge right now is just the cash flow. We have refunds going out to students appropriately on housing and dining, for example. A lot of the revenues coming in have been disrupted in the short term. And to Brock's point about the pressure that puts on employment, we've extended leave for employees within the system to keep them in paid status for the next several weeks. We did that a little bit before the Families First was passed, and now we've updated that. We're also trying to keep students in leave status at least for another payroll cycle or two as we kind of figure out the different moving parts. One of the really critical things for our planning is the pace of the federal support coming through from the CARES Act, and how is that going to help our short-term cash flow? Because we'll have some decisions coming up here in April and May that are getting very difficult for employees and our communities. And the extent that we can understand from Department of Education when money will start flowing to help with this, that will be incredibly important in our planning.
Okay. John, you have any thoughts on this one?
Maybe not necessarily unique ones, but budget stabilization, and job security, certainly over the next 12 to 18 months will be absolutely critical. We've had a number of years where we've actually been able to, try to make some gains and from even the Great Recession a number of years ago, and just trying to keep things stable in this time of uncertainty. I think increasingly, and I sense that there's actually been some good flexibility on this and movement, but keeping the state and the federal folks flexible and nimble related to rules and regulations and various reporting requirements that are going to that normally can stress our institutions, but we've seen some flexibility and leeway on some of those. I think that that will increase as we again move out over the next 3 to 6 months. But I think overall, I think we're going to be stressed to just maintain the credibility of the academic enterprise. Obviously we've all seen and various news reports and student petitions related to changing of grading policies, and there's just some long established, obviously, ways of assessing student learning, and the impact and the level and the magnitude of this. I think the crisis is really going to stress our institutional and system capacity to deal with some of the core issues particularly related to grading and just kind of the assessment of student learning across our system.
Okay. Joe, I don't know if you can respond. Do you want to try to take a shot at the first question?
Now?
Yes.
Okay, so relatively to the capacity, our need relative to the capacity is a lot like everybody else's, I think. But one of the things that we have learned over the years that our system can do is that, in fact, we have a policy that each one of our campuses is supposed to hold back 1% of their budget, and then that amount can be aggregated and held at the system level. So in fact, we have a cushion at the system level. So not only have we been able to tell our campuses this year, you don't have to give us the 1% back. And number two, we have some in reserve that we can help backfill. Now we're going to have to be really careful because this is also used in capital processes as well. But all of a sudden the campuses are finding out that there was a reason that we had these policies in place. And now they're very grateful that we have. But once again, from our perspective, it is getting all of these things aligned and making sure that we are responding to each of our campuses, which in fact have slightly different needs and levels of need and levels of urgency, if you will. Some are just more capable of moving ahead on their own. So I think our capacity is much better than we thought it might be. But I think we're all going to be running on empty pretty soon, emotionally as well as financially. So we just have to really watch out for that.
Right. Okay. So I want to give the rest of the folks on the webinar a chance to chime in here. If you have something that you want to add to this conversation about high need relative to your capacity to meet that need, please put that in the chat or raise your hand if you can see where to do that, and we'll try to call on you. But I don't want to leave dead time here because I know the time is precious and we don't have a lot to move around. So while you're thinking about what you might want to add to this part of the conversation, I'm going to ask Rob Kramer, what are you learning in Wisconsin from this experience?
I think one of the things Joe touched on it nicely in her comments, that leadership really matters. Initially, I think when our campuses in mid-March started talking about sending students home and telling them not to plan on coming back, a lot of folks were kind of scratching their head about it. And in hindsight, we were maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks out in front of some other people thinking about the challenges. So leadership really matters. I think the other piece I want to echo, I think both John and Brock touched to the amazing dedication of faculty, instructional staff, other employees to make this unprecedented pivot from learning based primarily at campus to online go as well as it's gone. That could have been a really, really bad couple of weeks for institutions. And from what I've seen and read, it feels like nationally it's gone pretty well, but we do need to acknowledge the stressors on the students and on other people from that. But that capacity to really move quickly when we had to was very impressive.
Okay. I'm going to go to Jim Johnson in Alaska, who has a comment on the gap between need and capacity. Jim, I think I am. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks. This is great conversation. And vis-a-vis the gap, there are so many of them. The one that I'm struggling a lot with right now is the gap between the capacity to respond to the crisis and then to begin pivoting to the future, and not just summer. We're not operating in person in the summer. But what about the fall? And actually, what about 5 years from now? To what extent is this pandemic going to change us forever? And how do we create the bandwidth while we're responding to the crisis day after day after day, changing guidelines from states and federal agencies to begin thinking about the long term? And then as we think about the long term, is there any way to see any opportunity, hope, bright light in that longer term? And so I see that as a big leadership challenge for us.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, Jim, because one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about, and I know others are as well, is, how can we position our systems and our campuses to be part of this recovery? We're going to come out of this. We're going to get to the other side. And I believe higher education is going to look fundamentally different, like so many things in our society are going to be different. I think we have a tremendous amount to contribute, and I think we need to start thinking about that soon. And I guess I just would add to that, that I'm not sitting on a campus or in a system office like all of you are. And so I have the luxury maybe to think about some of that rather than have to respond to the crisis of the day in terms of a group of students or a group of faculty that needs support. So Rebecca Karoff is saying, how do we bottle up our newfound agility and nimbleness and apply it as we're moving forward? How do we find the right time to think deeply about how we want to stay and continue to be transformed in truly beneficial ways? That's really about how do we make sure that we learn from the crisis and help to move the whole agenda forward? Any of the panel members want to take on that question?
And Rebecca, maybe we could tie that into Linda Martin's question, which is how do you balance shared governance in all of this urgency as well? 'Cause I think that ties into this issue of nimbleness.
That's fine. So Jason, why don't take a shot?
Oh, you're going to take a shot at answering that. I was just sort of posing it out there for the group, but I think it's a great question, right? We've proven now that we can be nimble. We did it under extreme circumstances, but I think we'll see a reactionary effect also as people begin to settle back into normal and people begin to think about what happened to shared governance and all of this and where were those voices. And I think there will be a reaction that people will want to be more involved moving forward in how we think about the new normal. But I'll turn it back over to our system colleagues here.
Okay, so John Hick, want to respond to, you can choose any of those issues that the Rebecca and Linda just put on the table, or the one about what you're learning from the crisis.
Let's see here. Yeah, to echo some of the previous comments, I really have been so pleasantly amazed at how quickly some of the long-time traditional, I'll say, institutional policy barriers came down to really adapt and respond to the immediate crisis. I mean, these are very, very, traditionally tough discussions regarding changes to promotion and tenure. Although, so the crisis provides some flexibility, kind of moving forward with that. Changes to admissions requirements, the mandating of the SAT or going optional, both at the, for undergraduate and or at the graduate level. And so those doors are, I believe, are now open. And just the notion of, I think there's going to be a large percentage of faculty that may have resisted moving some of their efforts online or using technology. And I think we already are getting stories from particularly some of our technical faculty of just like how amazed they are that, and how useful some of this new technology is. Certainly there'll still be some that, will fight it. I think one of the things that we're going to have to be careful of, though, is that given the speed at which a lot of this stuff has been put online, it certainly is not going to be of the quality of some of our more long-standing 100% online programs. So I think we're going to have a little bit of more than a little bit of storytelling and narrative around kind of how to respond to folks that may or may not have had the best experiences, over the next 4 or 5 weeks if this kind of continues into the summer and fall en masse.
Okay, I see a very thoughtful comment here from Robert Placido in Maine. I'm trying to unmute you. There we go. Would you like to share your thoughts with the group?
Love everything that you all are sharing. Appreciate everybody jumping on this call. You mentioned leadership a number of times. I think just the fact that this group has taken yet more time out to get together and support each other, it's really heartening. I wanted to share that we after we righted our own ships, we immediately started to focus outward, and we have spent most of our time in the last 2.5 weeks or so, we did an MOU with our state so that they could use our resources as their own. We're working with our hospital systems to provide overflow in our gyms and dorms. We're making hand sanitizer in our labs, which is a fun and interesting story I would be happy to share later. But we're also making other protective equipment with our 3D printers and that kind of thing. And I'm sure all of you are doing similar things, but it's the right thing to do. It's uplifting. As somebody who works in higher ed, we know the mission and believe in it. But it's great that our state policymakers can see that demonstrated, so they understand the value that we have. And thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Right. Well, and I know, and I'm hearing those kinds of stories from around the country as well. I think that we have an opportunity here to really make the case about what higher education is doing and begin to turn the narrative a little bit about the contributions that we in our systems and on our campuses are making to our communities during this very critical period of time. And I think that's one of the things that Nash and the System Center is looking forward to being able to collect those stories and hopefully get more visibility around them. As I know all of you will be doing in your own states, we could maybe do it collectively as a picture from across the country. I want to give our panelists one more shot at just any final thing you'd like to share about something you're learning or something you think we need to think of going forward. And then I'm going to turn it over to Maria, who's going to lead us through a poll, because we're very interested in hearing from you about what we can do to support you. But before I do that, any final comments from any of the panelists? Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to just comment that while we're going, especially in this crisis phase, that continuing on with some of the traditional modes of communication is really important too. It's been really important that the Chancellor has reached out to the leaders of our shared governance groups from across all the system. And I've met with the Faculty Council and the Student Council on multiple occasions to make sure that they know that there are lines of communication and that they can support each other. Our student and faculty leaders, as well as our staff leaders, have been really important in these, but those routine meetings carrying on has kind of calmed some folks down. They find themselves not in total crisis mode all the time. And it's really been interesting that usually stressful situations in faculty senates are all of a sudden a mutual support group that in fact revitalizes some things. So I think too, in the shared governance and communications piece, that's an important point.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Okay, Maria from the System Center I'll turn this over to her. We would like to have you use the Zoom function to help us gather some data on how we might best able to be help you. So Maria?
So we have two questions really, because we want to move forward and we want to be able to provide support to you. And Chrissy is going to help me set those up. They're 2-minute questions. The first one is, what can Nash be doing to support you? You can select any option that you see fit. And if you check other, please let us know via chat or an email what else we can do. This should take just a few seconds. And we have a second question moving forward on different issues. We can also see the results immediately or later on, and we can let you know.
Give them 5 more seconds.
So I guess document sharing in the Nash Crisis Clearinghouse has 80%. So that is something that we're working on, and we would love to receive some contributions from you for that. We're also maintaining a listserv, and we'll try to figure out a way to make it accessible by everybody. So, and the second one, facilitating discussion forums where Google Teams is also something we're looking into, so stay tuned. Let's have the second question now, Chrissy. So would another webinar on any of the following issues be helpful? These are some of the priority areas that we identified through the survey, through the listserv, through email exchanges. We would love to hear what you would want to discuss via webinar.
About 5 more seconds.
Okay.
I know while we're doing that, in the chat box, there were 1 or 2 comments asking for us to think about doing this in a couple of weeks, again, to bring people together.
Okay.
So we have the results, and I think financial implications gets the most votes. It's 65% of the people want to have a webinar on financial implications, and then followed by supporting students during COVID-19. And it's in academic affairs. So thank you. This is very helpful for us as we move forward, and we will be in touch about the future of webinars we host then. Thank you for your time and participating in the poll.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria, and thank all of you for responding. We have this question slide up here, but I see that we're just about out of time, so I think we'll just move past that. And let me just thank all of you for taking your time out to do this. I know you are being bombarded by opportunities to interact virtually with many, many different people in many different groups. You are carrying very heavy loads now, and so the fact that you took the time out to talk with us today and listen and put in your comments have been very helpful for us. We will be back with you in maybe as soon as 2 weeks. We don't want to overdo this, but we also want to respond if we feel that this is an important resource. We will be back, and in the meantime, stay healthy, stay well. Take that advice that we heard from one of the system presidents. Find some time for yourself. Disconnect a little bit so that you can continue to be strong, do the great work for your systems. We really appreciate all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you.